Welcome, everybody. My name is Sean Thibodeau. I'm the coordinator of community planning here at the Pollard Memorial Library. It's my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's reading featuring Stephen O'Connor, reading from his book. I don't have a copy of it to hold up because I read it in the ebook version, but there you go. Stephen has it. This is No Time to Quit Drinking. Stephen is the author. He's a writer from Lowell, Mass, where much of his work is set. His short stories have appeared in numerous literary journals, including Massachusetts Review, Athlon, and the Dime Show Review. After reading that the comic novel was dead, O'Connor became indignant and spent the next 3 years writing This Is No Time to Quit Drinking. So welcome, Stephen. Do you want to give a little bit of talk, a little bit of reading? I as we talked a little bit before, I read the book and I have some questions. I have some banter I could go back and forth with, but let you do your author talk out, and then we'll see what develops.
Yeah, it's good to see. I see a couple of people I haven't seen out there in a long time. Mike Flynn, and how are you? And Greg Steinberg. Hey, Greg. And other people I know a little better or see more frequently. So yeah, this is because I retired from the Voc on March 10th, and the coronavirus came. The school was closed March 13th. So I haven't really been doing Zoom meetings. So this is kind of a new format for me. Some people are masters of it now, like our friend Sean. But anyway, I'll do my best here with it. So some of you have already read the book. I thank Sean for being so conscientious to read the book before he came down to talk to me tonight. I was also going to mention, I have some other books. This is Smokestack Lightning, and that's stories of short stories of, well, most of them are Lowell. One is in Ireland and one is among the offshore fishermen out of Rye. And this is kind of a cerebral mystery, the Witch at Rivermouth. And The Spy of the City of Books, I'd forgotten the car, so I can't show you that one. But that was based on kind of a lot of interviews with a guy who was a spy in World War II, who was a French-Canadian guy who lived in Lowell. So this is, yeah, the new one. This is No Time to Quit Drinking. And I combined a couple of themes in here. One of them is, the subtitle is Teacher Burnout and the Irish Powers. So it's a teacher, and there's, part of the story is about the teacher and all the BS that he has to go through in that line of work. And then the other troubles in his life which start to mount up, which are, his wife is about to divorce him, and his father dies, and he inherits this farm, kind of based on Rowley's Christmas Tree Farm out there on Varnum Road. In fact, I went to talk to Rowley and interview him about the Christmas tree business. And so the property that he inherits is haunted, I guess you could say. There's a stone circle in the woods. And by the way, I wrote this before Outlander became popular. But there's a stone circle out in the woods, and it's always been thought to be what they call a Victorian folly, meaning that some people put it up there for scenery in the Victorian period. And it ends up that it was actually built by ancient Celts that, came up the Merrimack River and were eventually killed by the Indians. And it's still got a magic about it. And this creature called the Morrigan, who's an Irish goddess, is still kind of hanging about the place. I was a little wary about doing a book that had mythical characters in it, but I thought it would be fun and funny to include that. And, I was thinking like Flann O'Brien, a writer that I really enjoy, an Irish writer. He has a leprechaun in a book called The Third Policeman, and he's got all kinds of things in a book called It Swim Two Birds. And he's got a time machine in the Dalkey Archives, but they're fun to read. And when you come right down to it, most of the books that you read, if they're science fiction, we know that there's nobody on Mars trying to survive. Most of the books that we read have some elements where you have to suspend your disbelief because, there's really no ghosts. or maybe there is. I mean, who really knows? And that's another kind of idea in the book, is that life really is very strange, and we really don't know what's possible. Now, apparently the Air Force is saying that UFOs are real and that they're blowing by our best fighter jets. And these jet pilots are not generally hysterical people. They're pretty serious people. And they're saying, like, yeah, they're up there. So who really knows what's there? But anyway, if you read this book, it is another reality. It's different. You're kind of entering a different world, and you watch Bartley Hannigan deal with, with his issues at work, with his issues with his wife, with his issues with, well, as his wife breaks up with him, he tries the dating scene, and that becomes a nightmare. And pretty much he's one of these guys that if he bought all the lottery tickets, he would still lose. And but he is lucky in one respect, that he meets a woman that is really a good soul, a good person. She happens to be a stripper. That's a little bit of a problem for him, because he doesn't know how to introduce people to her, and he's a little bit ashamed of what she does. And I won't get too much into that, because if you haven't read it, I'll be giving the story away.
The climax of that, though, is his son is getting married and has a bachelor's party that is going to go to that
Strip club, yeah.
strip club, and he has to ask her not to be there that night. And that, I won't say how it works out, but that was kind of an interesting twist.
Yeah, there's you're always trying to think of some little twist, because you do, if you're going to write a book, you spend a lot of time thinking about it. When you're walking the dog, when you're walking in the woods, when you're washing the dishes, you're always kind of going over, well, this could happen, that could happen. And I talked to my wife, what do you think about this? And my sister and my brother-in-law, Kevin and Terry and Annie and Ellen, everybody. And, eventually you try to hone it down to a plot that hangs together, where there's no loose ends, and where people are surprised, but not like, that doesn't make sense with who that character is. He wouldn't do that. So the problem is, with the reading from it, is that I don't want to read any parts that give away what's going to happen. So I thought I'm just going to read a couple of pages, and this is it's a lighthearted scene, but which most of them are. And it's when this guy just got back from another horrible day of teaching, and he comes out to this lake where he lives in the Christmas tree farm. In the woods, there's a pond where he can go swimming, and this leprechaun is hanging around. He's actually a chloricon, which is slightly different than a leprechaun. Their main thing in life is that they like to drink wine.
I thought it was the hat. They have the same hat as a
Oh,
leprechaun.
he's got a special hat.
He's got a special hat, right? Yeah, a different kind of hat.
It was given to him by Captain
Napoleon.
Thomas Foley, who was an Irish captain of the Goliath, 74 guns at the Battle of the Nile. And so he wears the hat the captain gave him.
And it sounded, forgive me too, I don't remember exactly, but when I was envisioning it the way you wrote him, he seemed like a bigger fellow than like a wee leprechaun. You know what I mean? Like he was like a short man.
Yeah, I kind of pictured him the size of like an 8-year-old boy or something like that.
Okay, all right. Go ahead, I don't mean to interrupt.
That's all right. So so this guy goes for a swim in the pond, and he runs into this. This is the first time that he knows he's around. I won't get into all that, but this is when he finally runs into him. When finally he could leave the building, he nearly ran to his car. The days were getting longer, and there was still plenty of sun. He ran into the house, no sign of Cornelius, put on his bathing suit and sneakers, and sprinted up the trail, a towel over his shoulder. He was carrying a book, a cigarette case, and lighter. No phone, no electronics, nothing to disturb the silence but the occasional bird call and Mozart's Requiem in his head. But when he was on his back, churning slowly across the pond and squinting at the clouds sailing the troposphere, he became aware of a different music. At least he thought he did. His ears were underwater, but he was sure he'd heard a voice. I'm a rambler, I'm a gambler, I'm a long way from home. He righted himself and, treading water, listened. If you don't like me, then leave me alone. Rolling his body toward the direction from which the sound seemed to be coming, he noticed puffs of smoke rising from behind a thicket along the embankment, not far from where he'd left his towel and book. Stealthily, he swam a breaststroke toward the shore, while over the water a thin, hoarse voice carried the old song. Oh, moonshine, dear moonshine, oh, how I love thee. You killed me, poor father, but damn you, try me. Now bless all moonshiners and bless all moonshine, for their breath smells as sweet as the dew on the vine. Bartley rose dripping from the pond, grabbed his towel, and crept along the bank to peek over a tangle of wild morning glory vines that encompassed the tumbled trunk of a dead bleached tree. Though he was already sure what he'd find there, it was a jolt to his senses, a traumatic injury to his reason, to find in clear daylight before him the bicorn hat adorned with a panache or sweeping black feather. From under this arcane headgear, puffs of smoke floated up between refrains of the song. Without taking his eyes off the hat, which was trimmed with gold braid, Bartley stepped around the flowing undergrowth and was face to face with a little man smoking a clay pipe. He now saw that the black feather was held by a green rosette, in the center of which was a silver medal engraved with a harp. Ah, Bartley Hannigan, there you are, as large as life. The figure puffed again at the pipe, humming his song. Bulbous nose, green coat, and what Violetta had said, a mustache like the handlebars of a bicycle. Don Nippery Septo, I presume? Presume away! Ah, Bartley, as they say in the West, is be a dinna gana chiarda ach na bio dinna gana fipa. One may live without one's friends, but not without one's pipe. Very true, that. You're the lep, I mean the what, the chloricon? The black feather waggled as he nodded. Accurate, yes. Not that it matters to the popular mind. You haven't been in the wine cellar lately. Respect, Bartley, respect. I shouldn't like to steal drink from a man so recently dead, God rest its soul, be it ever so tasty. The wine, that is. Albert Boxler Riesling Grand Cru Sommerberg Vendage Tardive 2005, a vintage I won't soon forget. But no, I have me principles, so I do. Except when you invite me, as you did before, you being the rightful heir and all. Of course. Bartley knew that Cornelius had said a few things on the wine cellar door, a pine cone and a horseshoe, and he forgot what other ridiculous articles. Or at least he had thought them ridiculous, but he wondered now whether it had been those talismans rather than Septo's principles which had kept him away from the Grand Cru, whatever it was. God's teeth, but you were pissed as a fiddler. I see your shiner has healed well, be Jesus. His eyes took on a dreamy look as he peered through a cloud of smoke. Violetta Martinez. He said her name in a most refined Spanish, or at least it sounded so to Bartley. Oh, but she's a rare bird. Reminds me of the lovely Concepcion Castavelli, a woman I knew in Castile back in the days of the felon king. We cracked a few bottles the day he abdicated, I can tell you. What the hell are you talking? Have you called her at all? What are you waiting for? I could see she liked you. I can't imagine why, knackered as you were. He shook his head. No, that's a mystery, that is. First, regarding the woman in question, mind your own business. I hope you're not put off because she makes a few extra quid as an exotic dancer. And she is exotic, be Jesus. But if you can't see she's a lovely soul as well, why then you're as blind as one of those creatures at the bottom of the sea where they've no light nor any use for light. I don't have to explain myself to a person who I'm not even sure exists. Huh, there's a rum sailor you are to take that tack. Do you not have the evidence of your senses, as Marley said to old Scrooge? He was a right bastard now, wasn't he? I mean, until the spirit set him straight. Do you know that 70% of the people in Iceland believe absolutely in gnomes? Ah, but nowadays, round this place, no one believes in anything except. His bushy eyebrows lowered as he seemed to hunt about mentally for what it was people believed in. Cyberspace, he pronounced finally. That's your other world. All right, Bartley said. Let's say you do exist. Yes, let's do. And let's say that you exist too, since I'm not in the habit of discoursing with non-entities, though I must say at times you're damned close. He clamped down on the pipe stem again, his mouth invisible under the great mustache, while wreaths of smoke clouded the dusty old hat and rust-colored hair. Very funny. Well, let's say I exist because I'm not usually invisible. Gaps and folds in the curtain. It's not that we're invisible, really. It's just that you don't notice us. That makes no sense. Listen, Septo, why would a gnome or a leprechaun or a chloricon or anything of the kind appear to me? Oh, there he goes. Why me? Listen while I tell you, Bartley boyo. Sure, I wouldn't be wasting me time in confabulation with such as yourself were it not for her. He nodded gravely and thrust the bit of the pipe in the direction of the stone circle. Only thank heaven you have Cornelius O'Tuma about. He'll sort things out if they can be sorted. Why don't you appear to him then and confer on it? He smiled. Why don't you call Violetta? Exasperated, Bartley cried, where the hell do you come from? Not from bloody cyberspace, the little man chortled. Another planet then? Do I look like a bleeding alien? No, Ireland in the main. We're small enough and willing enough and clever enough to find the doors between places that occupy nearly the same space and move about. Not across the stormy main, mind you. Oh, no, I had to slip aboard the Happy Return, a foul barkie for that crossing. It was in October of 1882. But you came in 1882. Well, no one lives that long, my friend. No humans, you mean? We're a different race. Not a drop of Adam's blood, don't you know? Sad, that. Quite closes the big door. All a question of time. I confess I don't know what the word means. No one does. Not a bit of it. Not even the fellow in the wheelchair. I suppose we're out of time at this point. Nearly. Tricky thing, time. Very. When you have a proper perspective, it seems to me everything is happening at the same time somewhere. At the same time? What? I'm pretty sure yesterday was yesterday and tomorrow is or will be tomorrow. 'Tis what time seems to you, Bartley Bucko, but that it also seems that the world is flat now, doesn't it? His bushy brows descended over his blue eyes. He blew a pensive cloud and said, sure, what seems to be almost never is. He cleared his throat and continued, listen to me now while I tell you. He winked one eye shut and tapped his temple with an index finger. O'Tuma, clever fellow, strong will, great perception, subtle, very. Of course, he smells like a piece of rancid French cheese. Don't know why he hates the water, so comes from decent people. He rapped the bowl of his pipe against a rock and blew through the stem to clear it. You must take his advice all the same. He has the power. God knows I wouldn't face would be Jesus. Like I said, why don't you talk to Cornelius? He gets this stuff. Why are you talking to me? I don't like to get too close to a seventh son of a seventh son. An individual like that, he might beat you at your own game, and that would be humiliating. No, I prefer the Bartley intermediary, for a fella never cut himself on a dull blade. Thanks a lot. Septo looked as if he were about to take his leave. Wait a minute, Bartley said. Face whom? Give me a little more than this. I've been waiting. What in the name of the seven stars is that? Septo cried, pointing up into the branches of the trees. Bartley turned to look and, seeing nothing, turned back. The little man was gone, leaving only a lump of charcoal, tobacco, and a wisp of smoke dissipating in the air. So that's the scene with the chloricon. And you're all muted. I can't hear you clapping, Annie.
Bravo, bravo.
Some folks that joined a little bit late, so just a reminder, we're going to stay on mute unless you're coming off to a clap, and that's good. If you have questions, you can type them in the chat box, clicking on the chat function in the bottom middle. I'll let Stephen take a drink because that was quite a long passage. And I'll read out your questions to him from the chat window. Wow, that was great. I'm really glad you read that passage because it reminded me of, I like that Dole, he was talking about his age, but the time thing really foreshadows some things at the end, some kind of Outlander stuff. And I don't think I would have appreciated that without coming back to it.
Yeah.
The other thing
he says to Bartley at one point, he says, I wonder sometimes if I've wasted my life. He says, because, I probably only have another 400 years and there are so many vintages I've never tasted. So that's the main purpose of his life.
Yeah. Also, the mythology I thought was interesting, and in the end of the book, talk about studying Irish folklore way back in the 1970s.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about that, because this book is rife with Irish, and it seemed clear that you knew what you were talking about. It wasn't just coming up.
I fooled you.
The other thing I want to ask is, as you know, I don't want to overwhelm you, but I missed it earlier when you were talking about the runes in Tingsboro, the actual, you know,
Yeah.
Druid Hill. Is that real? Is there an actual
Yeah, there is in LeBlanc Park, which
blank
is
part? Okay.
right back of the not the Sullivan School, it's the Wang School. There's a park there. As a matter of fact, the picture on the back of the book, I'm leaning against one of those rocks that's
I,
at that place. Now, Jay Pendergast, who was a local character archaeologist, at one point he got some people from Harvard to come down, so that's where I got that idea.
I
And
see.
they did some excavations around the rocks, and then they finally determined that they didn't know how old it was, but they didn't think it was like, very, very old. Um, so I kind of used that, but it turns out that it is old, and I moved the position of it. But you mentioned about UMass and studying all this Irish stuff. When I was there, I happened to find out there was a woman there named Maria Tomasco, and she was originally Maria Fleming. She's Irish, but anyway, she's Maria Tomasco. And she studied Old Irish under John V. Kelleher, who was one of the guys that worked on breaking the Japanese code in World War II. So it makes sense that he would be studying Old Irish. So she became a translator of Old Irish, and she's translated a bunch of stuff. And last time I talked to her about 3 years ago, she goes around the world and speaks at seminars about translation theory. And so I took all the classes. First of all, of course, I took Old Irish because it was so useless that I had to learn it, right? So, I mean, there'd be usually about five of us sitting around a table, and she would say, like, translate the next, 5 pages or something, and you had to write out on a paper every other line and then do your translation under it. And you really get a feel for these old Irish manuscripts, which a lot of them are really wild and crazy stuff. And like I had read the Iliad and the Odyssey. And the Iliad, there's these great battles of, you know, they're very realistic. Like, the spear goes in the guy's neck, and he mentions that it pries his teeth out, and they're really graphic. And you know that whoever wrote that really witnessed a lot of battles at some point.
Yeah.
Whereas, when you read like the old Irish epic, like the Toyn Boculni, the cattle raid of Cooley, it's just crazy stuff, and you have these tales with like the great Irish hero Cuchulainn fighting with Ferdiad, and it says like they cut holes in each other so big that the birds were flying through the holes, but then that night they rested, and somebody put some healing lotion on them, and then they're ready to fight all day the next day. And but she was great. We'd sit around translating this stuff, and it was like coterie of people that we were all into this stuff. And then she taught a lot of other classes in Irish folklore and, not usually Irish history. There were other people doing that, but she was more into the folklore and the tales and the, translations and all that stuff. So I took all her old Irish classes and any other class that she offered. And in fact, I came across the exam for the old Irish class the other day, and we had to translate something, and I couldn't translate it today. It's mostly gone, but I remember a lot of the kind of tone and style of those old stories. And well, there's some old Irish in here with it. Cornelius O'Toole goes and is reciting old Irish to try to call up the spirit of the Morrigan, and
Right.
that's actually an old Irish poem called The Curse of the Morrigan. And I couldn't put it in English. I didn't put it in English because the translations are usually copyrighted by somebody that did it. And then I'd have to get permission. And then I thought about trying to do my own translation with my Torneisen's Old Irish and my dictionary, but I said, no, the heck with it. People are going to have to imagine. It's just, he's trying to call her up. And, you can look it up, though. I put the link to the translation at the end of it.
Oh, and at the end, that's fascinating. And did Garcia Brogans give you the idea to tie in the Mexican and the Irish mythology, or where was that? Like, I thought that was fascinating. And
Yeah.
there were place names mentioned in Lowell, but Garcia Brogans wasn't one of them. I don't
No,
know.
well, my wife is Colombian.
Okay,
Uh,
right.
so it's been very interesting just over the years being with her. Aside from the fact she's a great person, of course, but
Sure.
just to learn all about Colombian culture. And so I always find these Hispanic women slipping into these things that I write, just because there's a lot you can add to the story with that other perspective of a different culture. And I just started writing a new one, and all of a sudden, right away within the first 10 pages, I have this, Alba Santa Gita, and then I'm like, maybe I've overdone it with the Hispanic women characters. I got to, put something different in there. But yeah, I figured Mexico. Well, see, I don't want to give away too much of the story in case.
Yeah. No, I don't want you to do that either. I'm going to read a couple of questions from the thing, but first, I was going to ask you about, what was I going to ask? Oh, you mentioned Cornelius in that passage, but we haven't talked much about that character, which
Yeah.
was a classic character, reminding me a bit of the Confederacy of the Dunces guy, Ignatius J. Riley, but he's more like, he's a expert
Yeah.
in
Well, I
Irish.
guess I can say it here because I'm sure that this person is not among the people who I see on the Hollywood squares here, nor is he likely to hear about it. But
Oh,
that was based on a character that I knew, and I say knew. He's not dead, but I mean I haven't talked to him. He's an artist, and he sends me a Christmas card most years, and it's a hand painted thing, and I try to save them. I hope I haven't lost them in all the papers and books and stuff. But I met this guy in Ireland, and this sculptor George Laffin, and I knew George Laffin because of Jay Pendergast. When he came over, knew all these interesting people, and he introduced me to all of them, and then I became friends with them. And George Laffin was he restored paintings for the National Museum, and he was a sculptor. He was cultivated, great guy. And he took under his wing this guy, Tig McSweeney, who was a painter from Cork. And the thing is, he came from, really out in the bogs. And he had this theory that, like Cornelius in the book, that, like when you wash, you wash off the protective oils and you'll be sick, is the way he would put it. Now in Ireland, the temperature is, the climate is pretty temperate and it's kind of cool, and you don't notice that somebody doesn't bathe as much. But when he came over here, and it's 95 degrees in summer, it was brutal. And so there was a time when I actually, at my mother's house, pretty much had to like shove him into the shower. And then I threw out his clothes, and I put some of my clothes there for him to wear. And I was working with this black guy doing construction. His name was Willie, and he was a hot ticket. And he was older than me at the time. I was whatever, 25, and he was like 45. So he was like an old man to me, but he was a nice guy. And so we would go out together, just kind of socialize after work. So I told him, I'm going to bring Tig. Now, Tig is an Irish name. It's Tadgh. But Willie couldn't figure out Tig. So he started calling him Tiger. That was his translation of it. So I said, hey, Tig, I'm going to be down the old Worthen. And I got Tig to take a shower, and I gave him new clothes. So we got to encourage him. So when I bring him down and you see him, compliment him and, make him feel like, so he's going to want to keep doing this. So I walk into the old Worthen, and Willie is there, and he looks at Tig and he says, Tiger, you're smelling like one of them Irish roses. And he also said to me, I've never painted a black person. And I would like, because he did really great portraits of people, a unique style, but I mean, really good portraits. And so I said, Willie, he wants to paint you, so Willie was living on Middlesex Street in my mother would say a flop house, like one of the shelters. And so he painted Tig in this royal blue shirt, and God only knows where that painting is now, or where Willie is. I haven't seen him. I went away after that, and I never hooked up with him again. So, Tig, he was like, I took some of his personality and also some of the things he said, like at the airport when Cornelius Otuma, seventh son of a seventh son from Ballyvorney, arrives, and the woman in customs, pulls out in his luggage. He has like a knapsack, and she's like, "You have a book and a stick? Oh, well, yeah, that's a hazel wand now. It's very efficacious. And she's like, "Well, this is all you have?" And he says to her, "Well, you could be too prepared." And that line I never forgot, because Tig McSweeney was stayed at my house, my poor mother, and slept out in the screened-in porch there. And in the morning, he'd get up. He was going to go up to Montreal, and he's like, "I'm going to go up and take a bus up and see Montreal." Oh, well, that's great, Tig. They ended up turning him back at the border. But anyway, so I said to him, like, "What are you bringing?" He said, "Well, I have my bag." And so I look in the bag, right? And he's got like a few tubes of paint, a rag. And I'm like, "Tig, what are you doing? What, you're going to Canada with this? You don't have anything here." And he says to me, "You could be too prepared." I said, "Well, there's no fear of that." So, geez, I hope Tig never reads this book over there, but maybe by now he's come around, hopefully.
It's interesting.
He is still alive though, because I saw he has a YouTube video showing off all his farm. He's got the wool hat pulled down, the overcoat, and he's showing all his different paintings. Huh?
Pig farm?
They had pigs, I think, originally. It was in Kilnamartra. And I went down there for a weekend one time with my relative Dermot O'Connor, and he has his fireplace he made out of, it was like a gold bird, and the wing was the mantle of the fireplace. He's an incredible artist, and he paints like on the ceilings of his place. He's got everything is painted. And my mother's house, which we sold after she passed away about 3 years ago, but down in the basement, there's a on the wall, there's a painting that he did. And he just did it with a house painting brush. And I had like maybe 3 colored paints there, but he did the Merrimack River, 2 people in a boat, a fish jumping out, and he just, boom, slapped it out like nothing. So
interesting. It's interesting too with that scene in the book with Cornelius in the bar. Like a lot of this book I'm hearing is now, it's based on actual events in your life, and I hesitate to ask about the educational component of the book, because and a question you answered earlier, you are retired for and so I think this ties into one of the questions that appeared in the chat window. How long did it take you to write this story? Annie says, and Annie also says that she loves it. And I would add on to that, like, how long have you been taking notes about educational stuff? Because it was really a litany of, ill feeling towards, I guess.
Mainly the ill feeling is mainly toward the Department of DESE, what do they call it? Department. Now I'm starting to lose it all, because in a way I want to put it out of my mind. It was a nightmare.
Yeah.
Department of Elementary and Secondary Education.
Right.
I don't know how much money they spend in their budget, and I've never been able to find out, because if you Google DESE budget, all you get is DESE stuff from DESE about what they're doing. But nobody has wasted more money for the taxpayers of Massachusetts than the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And, the administration in my building and in all the buildings, it's not really their fault, because they have to enforce the wacky stuff that DESE comes up with all the time. And, from probably around 1995 or 6 on, it's just been new crazy stuff all the time. And you're probably thinking, oh boy, why did I get this guy going? But really, a lot of it is stuff that just, it doesn't do the students any good. It doesn't do the teachers any good. And a lot of good teachers left early. They would have stayed around, but especially older teachers, like if you're a young teacher now, as my friend Eric Burgess says, they implant the chip. They put the chip in there. You think you have to do all this stuff, but if you had any kind of academic freedom, if you're used to not doing all the BS, and then all of a sudden you have to do all this paperwork and hang up the placards of what standard you're teaching that day and write on the board your objective for the day. Like the kids are gonna, oh, we're doing standard 17.1 today, and this is students will, understand the difference between a semicolon and a colon, or whatever it is. It's just continue the teacher evaluations where you have like 60 things, and it's like fill out evidence, or they call them artifacts of each thing. So that's what drives Bartley like crazy. Like he's talking to his boss and he's like, well, you don't have any in your binder, you don't have any evidence that you have a class, a safe classroom environment. He's like, well, nobody's ever died in my room. Does that count? And he's like, that's not funny, Bartley. You could take a picture of the fire exit plan, that could be a good artifact. And it's ridiculous stuff. And if you're a new teacher now getting certified, oh my God, I feel so bad for these people. I mean, this guy that I knew was there every day till 5 trying to, fill in all these things. And it's busy work. I call it meta work. It's work about work. And it really gets in the way because as a teacher, your most valuable commodity is time. Like nobody leaves at 2. I mean, you're always there. You got to after school, clean your room, put stuff on X2, the grade some papers, figure out what you're doing the next day. And over the weekend, usually I'd take one day, usually Sunday, and go in and plan what I'm going to be doing the next day. So time, and during the day, you have special ed meetings you have to go to, and you have all kinds of paperwork you have to do, plus just planning and correcting and all this stuff. So when time becomes such an important thing to you, and then these people just frivolously waste tons of your time on stuff that isn't going to do you or the kids any good, it's so frustrating. I see Greg Steinberg there. He was a teacher at the Voc.
It seems like no coincidence that this book was published after you retired, though, because I was reading it and I was
probably better.
It's not necessarily the ranting, but it was sort of the characterizations of some of the administration in the building. I was afraid for you, and then when you told me you were retired, I was excited. But I do want you to answer Annie's question. How long did it take you to write this?
Okay. Oh, but before I get to that, the administration really there's nobody in the building when I was there, that it's based on. There is a guy. There is one guy who left a few years back who was very rough on the teachers that were under him. He was on a bit of a power trip, and I kind of satirized him. That's why the book is dedicated to John Kent, a teacher that died because that guy, I think, drove him to an early grave, unfortunately. But how long did it take to write the book? It was, it's hard to say because I'm not sure exactly when I started it, like, probably like 7 years ago or something. And, then part of it was like, I had it on my hard drive, and I have different readers that, I go to, and then, the problem is that those readers, sometimes, they're obviously very bright people and they've liked everything else I did, but this was a different thing. And then, so one guy said to me, like, it made me sad. And I'm like, it made you sad? Wow. Like, that's the opposite of what it's supposed to be. So I started to think like, oh, I must have missed the mark. But I think what it is that, some of those people, they're very smart, but they have particular personalities, and not everybody's going to like anything. And so I kind of put it away. And then maybe 6 months later, I had this idea in my mind. Oh, so it's I missed the mark. It's not. And then I would start to read it, and I would say to myself, I like it, And so at some point you have to kind of say like, okay, I'm going to just put that aside. And then you start to, have other people read parts of it, and then they'll say like, oh, I love it. It's great. So at a certain point, I just decided like, okay, I'm going to really work on this. So, there were times when it was sitting on my hard drive for a long time and I didn't touch it. But I'd probably say of the time that I just spent working on the book, probably be like 4 years or something.
I would, I'd say the early part of the book reminded me, I don't know if you know the Coen brothers film Serious Man, where, like there's the protagonist just gets everything dumped on him, and he doesn't, he's trying to react as best he can, but he really has this kind of cyclone of misery, that ultimately, like, this book is a comedy. Everyone, there's a happy ending. And I will say in the movie version of this book, I think it's going to have a Halloween theme, which is really in vogue right now. The Samhain, the climax happens right on Halloween. So this is a good
Yeah.
time to read that book. Not that we plan to have the talk, so far out, but I think it's pretty fortuitous that we're having it now because of how much Halloween factors in. But yeah, for a long time, he's caught in his own woes, and it doesn't really turn around for a bit of it. So yeah, I could see how it might make you sad a little bit. I want to get to some of these questions though. Sue asked, I think in response to, do you mean Dr. Steinberg? You don't have to answer that.
Yes, I used his name in there. Yes.
And I don't want to miss, Kevin Kavanaugh asked, what have been the biggest literary influences on you? And I think maybe just in general, or maybe just for this book. You mentioned Flann O'Connor. Flann
O'Brien.
Yeah.
I think, but James Joyce has the book of short stories, Dubliners. And reading that when I was young, I started to think, boy, it would be great someday to write a book called Lowellians and just have stories of people based in Lowell. I ended up, I guess, calling that book Smokestack Lightning because Lowellians is not the greatest title. So I think James Joyce, and then, just different prose writers like, Henry Thoreau is such a great observer of nature and writer about nature. I read a lot of Thoreau, and I think I learned a lot about writing just from his style is so clear. And I always like to have some strong descriptive pages of nature in the books because it's such an important part of my life, and I think it's just an important part of life in general. For this particular book, I would say influences are Mervyn Wall. He's an Irish writer, and if you ever want to read a funny book, there's a book called The Unfortunate Fursey. I almost called this book The Unfortunate Bartley. And I read it a long time ago. I didn't want to reread it because I didn't want it to be too much, take too much from that book, just the kind of tone or the sense of it, which is this guy with crazy stuff happening to him like that. And the other humorous writer I really like is Kingsley Amis. So like Lucky Jim,
Yeah.
and One Fat Englishman. That's a great title. And there's a book called The Green Man, which also has this, the Green Man in England. The Green Man is kind of like a natural figure in the woods, mythological type figure but he lives in the woods and comes out. So that's what I would say for that book, O'Brien, Wall, and Kingsley Amis.
Very good. Craig H. writes, I very much enjoyed the peek into the life of a public educator, gave the story an anchor in daily reality, which well enabled its flights into folklore and crime fiction. Great choice for sharing a portion of that story. Any chance you'll tackle the character-rich world of old men playing soccer in any upcoming book?
Well, yeah, but the first part of that, by the way, boy, that would have been a good blurb on the back of that. That's pretty good. Yeah, Craig Himmelberger, we played soccer together in the over 40s, over 50s, I think. Yeah, over 40s and over 50s. We got up. All right. No, I think I played my last game. I was probably 58, and now they're talking about, why don't you play on the over 63 team? I don't know. It's it's kind of sad, when you see the over 63 men playing, and then it's even sadder when you get out there and you realize that there are guys faster than you. So
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 not fodder for a
Greg
novel.
was a good forward though.
Yeah.
When I first met him, he was playing defense, but anyway.
There's a lot of noir in this book too, or not a lot, but at least one. There's a hitman. Um,
Well, yeah.
that was that one of the early things you put in, or did you kind of work into that to get to a climax? Or
No, later.
okay,
See, that fits in with the whole story of Violeta Martinez,
right,
and why she's there, you
right,
know, and the where she works is, strip clubs are generally frequented and run by unsavory characters, and so that the owner of that club is in with the mob, and so that, yeah, I try to come up with some other subplots. You can't just have one thing, or like this guy's dealing with the Morrigan, or just school. I like to kind of have different things going on. If you ever watched an episode of Seinfeld,
mm,
which I'm sure everybody has, right? There's usually like two or three different things that are going on in that episode,
yeah,
and they were brilliant at the way they'd work them out. A lot of times, like three different plots would work out in the last 2 minutes of the show.
yeah. I'd say too. I know we talked earlier that when you read from this book, you either read the section you read or the intermezzo, which is the battle of the imagining of the Vikings coming in. And I'd say that's a marked difference in the writing. That was a fascinating chapter. That was one of the I don't want to say and lead you to think that I didn't like the rest of the book, but that chapter in particular jumped out and was really one of my favorite pieces of the book. And I'm glad that you put it in there. And I thought it was really strong writing.
Yeah, well, actually, of course, because it happened 1,000 years ago, in
Right.
time, it should go first. But I was afraid if I put that first, that people are going to pick up the book, open it, and think the whole book is written in that style and tone. And a lot of people might say, like, well, I don't want to read this. What is it? So for the other people, if you haven't read it, it's just the the scene where the Indians come to surround and eventually kill the people that have come down the river that are at that stone circle. And so it's kind of told from the voice of the Indian. And so there's the writer, I believe it's Stephen Vincent Benet, and he has a short story um, told in that kind of a style, and it's like a tribe of people coming into New York, like after the apocalypse, after the what's left of New York City after the great nuclear war. And there's just different tribes of people back. There's the power grid, everything is gone and down. And so I think I kind of had that in the back of my mind.
Sure. Interesting. So I'll read another one out from the chat window. We're at about 7:51. So if folks, I think I'm going to end the recording at about 8 o'clock, and I don't want to cut the party short. So if folks want to later on, it seems like you have some friends on this chat, so I don't want to tell you can't talk, but I'll read these from the chat window and then
I just put my glasses on and I saw my old friend Joe Galligan and Catherine Galligan.
How do you read with them?
How you doing? I haven't seen them in years.
So Claudine writes out, thanks, Steve. I'm resigned, retired from teaching down here in Southwest Florida. Being in the trenches with you at the Voc and our shared experiences, school characters seem like real life. Do you remember? Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I know. I'm telling you this. I remember this teacher said to me one time, we were standing at the copy machine, and she said, when did teaching become such a, I forget the word she used, but just like such a horrid profession? I think so many people felt that way. And I got audited. Like one day that the Red Sox were in the playoffs. They were playing Detroit. This is probably like, I don't know, however many years ago it was, 7, 8 years ago. And so the Red Sox are in the playoffs. So I'm going out to get some beer. And the mailman says to me, oh, I have something for you. You have to sign it. And I have to film you signing it. And it's from the Department of Ed. And I go, oh, God, I'm being audited for my professional development points. So I signed the thing. Sure enough, please gather up all your professional development points, because I had 2 certifications, English and ESL. I spent the next month gathering up so many credits for this, so many PDPs for that, and writing them out and filing them and having the boss go over this and sign that. What a nightmare. And they do these random audits. You're supposed to be getting recertified. My original teaching certificate said lifetime. And then they just changed it and said, no, every 5 years you got to get recertified. So you got to take all these classes and you got to get PDPs and special ed and pedagogical and theoretical, whatever it was. I don't know. So yeah, anyway, whatever the question was, I agree with you. It was not good.
Verisimilitude in the book, though, right? Is that how it?
Verisimilitude, yeah, I would say so. I mean, I exaggerated it a bit. I mean, for effect, but it was like I said, people left that would have stayed for a few more years.
Yeah. I mean, I don't mean to degrade the book by characterizing this, but I think it's fair to say this book is sort of a revenge fantasy, on a number of them.
Yeah, well, I think so on the Department of Ed, because that scene where he takes all his stuff for recertification and the evaluate and just rips it all up and throws it away. Yeah, that was like, when my boss told me the last year that I was going to retire, and she said, I'm not going to evaluate you this year. You're leaving in March. And so don't worry about your binder and your artifacts. I mean, that was so liberating. I took all these binders and just like threw them in the barrel. And I just focused on teaching. It was so nice, because these things are really distractions, and people don't realize that. Like it's really what you're doing is making people more stressed out, less rested, and what you need to do is really be focused on what you're on teaching. So yeah, I guess that's accurate.
All right. Maybe one last question, and then I'll shut off the recording, and folks can come off mute and chat with you if they like. Jim Wild writes, I like the cover design, and I do too. I thought it was a really cool cover once I finally figured out what all the elements were as I was reading the book.
Yeah.
But and he wants to know, what are you working on next?
Oh, by the way, the cover,
Yeah.
that's my son did that.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, Brian O'Connor. He goes by the name of Bryman when he's doing these drawings and stuff. The final thing that I'm working on now, I haven't figured out, again, you got to think of a plot, but I'm thinking of like a guy that owns a bar in Lowell. There's a lot of small time bookies, gangsters, wannabe gangsters that hang out there. And well, I shouldn't talk about it too much because I really haven't come up with the plot, but it's going to be, I'm talking to a guy who knows a lot of these gangster types, and it's pretty interesting stuff. So I think I'm going to do something with that. It was either that, or I was, going to go way back in history and do something, like 1,000 years ago, and the Vikings arriving in the New World. But it's like, it's a lot of research.
Well, I think I speak for everyone when I say we're just glad that you're still writing, even if you can't talk too much about it.
Well, thanks, and thanks everybody for coming tonight.
Yeah, I'm going to stop the recording right now. Thanks everybody. Clap, 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 and
thank you very much. Good to see you all.